what happens when a gang rises to power from within the prison system? A gang that controls everything from narcotics trafficking to murder for hire and leaves a trail of destruction behind. Meet the 6 most dangerous Mexican mafia members in California, men whose violent actions, ruthless tactics, and undeniable influence have impacted lives and left a lasting legacy. These are the men whose names are remembered in prison cells and the streets they once controlled. Which of these figures do you think had the most impact on the Mexican Mafia? Comment below with your thoughts. The Mexican Mafia, or La M, began in the 1950s within the walls of California's prisons. Initially formed as a protective force for Latino inmates, it soon grew into something far more dangerous. At Duelvo Quesel Institution, small group of inmates united with a shared goal: to ensure their survival in a system dominated by violent rival gangs. What started as a defense against other groups quickly transformed into an organized crime syndicate, with plans to control much more than just prison life. In the early days, the gang faced constant struggles. With violence as a constant, the members of La M realized that to gain real power, they would need to extend their influence beyond the confines of the prison walls. By the 1960s and 70s, the Mexican Mafia was no longer just a group of inmates trying to protect themselves. They had grown into one of the most feared and powerful criminal organizations in the state of California. In the beginning, their reach was limited to the prison system, but as their power expanded, they began taking control of illegal activities on the streets as well. Narcotics trafficking, extortion, and murder for hire became their means of influence, spreading through California like wildfire. With each passing year, their grip tightened on both prisoners and the communities outside the gates. They managed to recruit violent individuals who had a singular focus: to rise through the ranks and enforce the rules of La M at any cost. Now let's take a look at the 6 men who not only contributed to the gang's rise, but were also some of its most dangerous members. Each one entered the world of crime at different points, but they all shared a brutal ambition. Over time, they worked their way up, cementing their power and leaving behind a legacy of violence. Now we'll begin by exploring the life and actions of number 6 on our list, Martin Madrigal Cazarez. Born in Oxnard, California, Martin Madrigal Cazarez came from the tough streets of Colonia Chiques, a gang where he learned early on that survival meant being willing to do whatever it took. It wasn't long before his aggressive nature and unrelenting drive caught the attention of the Mexican Mafia, and by the early 2000s he was inducted into the gang. But what made Martin stand out from many of the others was his ego. His need to prove himself, to rise quickly through the ranks, became evident in everything he did. His ambition was as fierce as it was dangerous. He didn't just want power, he wanted control. Martin's rise wasn't slow. He quickly began making a name for himself, not just for his violent nature, but also for his ability to get things done in ways that others wouldn't dare. Drug trafficking became his primary focus. He took control of methamphetamine shipments coming from Mexico, building a network that reached deep into the heart of the Mexican Mafia's operations. His ability to forge connections with Mexican drug cartels made him a key figure in the gang's business operations. His hands were in everything, from managing shipments to overseeing sales. But it wasn't only his connections that made him feared. Military-grade weapons were his tools of choice. With them, he ensured his operation remained protected and untouchable. Those who crossed him or got in his way didn't get second chances. His violent reputation spread like wildfire, and soon Martin became a man people feared to even look at the wrong way. He instilled fear, making sure that no one ever thought of challenging him or his territory. Martin's influence wasn't confined to California. After being deported to Mexico in 2006, his operations only grew. He took control over a vast network of gangs and traffickers in Baja California, spreading the Mexican Mafia's reach far beyond US borders. For a time, the influence of La M seemed unstoppable, with Martin's grip tightening over everything in his path. However, in 2023, his career came to a tragic end. Martin was killed in Baja California, his death marking the end of his violent legacy. Despite his death, the connections he made, the networks he built, and the fear he spread continue to echo in the corridors of the Mexican Mafia. His legacy is one of ruthlessness, ambition, and unyielding power, a legacy that has left a lasting mark on the gang's history. At number 5, we have Leonardo Antolin, born in Whittier, California. Leonardo Antolin entered the world of crime at a young age, drawn to the streets and the dangerous lifestyle that accompanied them. Growing up in an environment where gangs were an undeniable part of everyday life, Antolin's path seemed almost inevitable. He found his place within the Cazarez gang, a subgroup of the Mexican Mafia, known for its strong ties to the larger organization. This affiliation would shape not only his early years, but also his identity as a criminal figure within the broader landscape of California's underworld. The Cazarez gang was notorious for controlling neighborhoods in Southern California through intimidation, extortion, and involvement in the drug trade. From the outset, Antolin learned that to survive, he had to command respect. And respect in the world he was living in was never freely given. It had to be earned, and it was earned through power, control, and fear. In a world where being at the top meant everything, Antolin understood that climbing the ranks meant more than just surviving. It meant leaving an indelible mark on everyone around him. One of the defining moments of Antolin's life came in 2016 when he orchestrated the brutal murder of Dominic Solo Gonzalez. Gonzalez, a fellow member of the Mexican Mafia, had violated the unwritten rules of the gang. His actions had become a threat to the internal balance of power, and Antolin, unwilling to let anyone undermine his position, decided to make an example of him. The murder wasn't a random act of violence, it was a deliberate, calculated move to solidify Antolin's place at the top. He understood that, in the Mexican Mafia, loyalty was everything, and to maintain control, a message had to be sent. Gonzalez's life was taken in a cold, calculated manner, not because of personal animosity, but as a reminder that loyalty, respect, and power were the only things that mattered. This murder was an unequivocal statement. Disrespect would be dealt with harshly without hesitation. As the gang's influence in Southern California grew, so did Antolin's role within it. His ability to enforce gang rules with an iron fist earned him a reputation that spread throughout the ranks of the Mexican Mafia. Antolin became a key player in managing drug trafficking operations that spanned the entire region. He was directly involved in overseeing the distribution of illegal narcotics, controlling key territories, and ensuring that no one could encroach on the Mexican Mafia's turf. But his operations were not just about selling drugs. He was a master at maintaining control over the streets, ensuring that his orders were followed to the letter. His methods were brutal, but they worked. Those who dared to challenge him were silenced, often through violence, while those who fell in line enjoyed the protection that came with being part of the gang. However, as with all violent and dangerous individuals, Antolin's career came to an inevitable end. Law enforcement, always working to dismantle the power of the Mexican Mafia, eventually caught up with him. His downfall wasn't as dramatic as some would expect. There were no major shootouts or violent clashes. Instead, Antolin's case became significant for the fact that, once caught, he cooperated with authorities. In a rare move that would make his story even more complex, Antolin chose to testify and provide information about the inner workings of the gang. His decision to cooperate with law enforcement was seen as an unusual departure from the Mafia's code of silence. For him, the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison without any form of compromise may have been too much to bear. As a result, he was sentenced to 33 to 40 years in federal prison. But even as he sat in prison, Antolin's influence and legacy remained. The crimes he committed and the power he wielded within the Mexican Mafia left an undeniable mark on California's criminal world. His story underscored the extent to which the Mexican Mafia's reach extended, how deeply it infiltrated neighborhoods, controlled illegal activities, and maintained its iron grip on the lives of so many. His cooperation with authorities didn't erase the fear and respect he had earned among the gang's ranks, nor did it diminish the impact he had on the world he had helped build. Leonardo Antolin's legacy isn't one that can be easily forgotten. His rise through the ranks of the Mexican Mafia wasn't marked by subtlety or restraint. Instead, it was characterized by violent enforcement, the systematic elimination of rivals, and the unyielding drive to be at the top. His actions reverberated across Southern California, influencing not only the Mexican Mafia but also the criminal networks that operated alongside it. His name is forever linked to a period of time when the Mexican Mafia was at its most powerful and most dangerous. At number 4, we have Manuel Valencia. Was born in Las Vegas, New Mexico in 1960, and from an early age, his life was marked by crime. Growing up in a world where drugs and gangs were part of the fabric of everyday life, it didn't take long for Valencia to fall into the dangerous world of cocaine trafficking. Before long, he was involved in illegal dealings that would set him on the path to becoming a central figure in one of California's most powerful gangs. His journey led him to the Harpies gang in South Los Angeles, a gang controlled by the Mexican Mafia. As a shot caller, Valencia quickly found himself at the helm of a profitable and violent operation. His role as the leader meant more than just organizing criminal activity. He was the one who set the rules, enforced discipline, and controlled every aspect of the gang's operations. Valencia was responsible for ensuring that everything from drug trafficking to extortion ran smoothly. One of his key tasks was to collect the taxes from local drug dealers who operated within the Harpies territory. He made sure that anyone who profited from the streets paid their due, or else there would be consequence. But it wasn't just the drug trade that defined Valencia's power. It was his ability to maintain control through violence and intimidation. One of the most notorious examples of this was when he orchestrated the murder of a man over a small $230 drug debt. For many people, this would have been an insignificant amount of money. But to Valencia, it was a matter of principle. When the man failed to repay the debt, he made an example of him. The murder was swift, brutal, and served as a reminder of who was in charge. It wasn't just about money. It was about making sure no one dared to defy the Harpies gang's authority. However, as with many men who climbed through the ranks of organized crime, law enforcement eventually caught up with him. The charges against him were significant: racketeering, drug trafficking, and of course, murder. His violent ways didn't go unnoticed for long, and eventually the long arm of the law reached him. In 1990, he was convicted and sentenced to 27 years in federal prison for his involvement in various crimes, reinforcing the Mexican Mafia's ever-growing influence in Southern California. His sentence marked a turning point for both him and the gang. His violent career was over, but the legacy of his actions would be felt for years to come. Next is Jose Loza. Born in Brawley, California, Jose Loza was introduced to a life of crime at an alarmingly young age. By the time he was 13 years old, he was inducted into the Cazarez gang, a violent subgroup of the Mexican Mafia. Growing up in a community where gangs and crime were a constant presence, Loza's path was set before he could even fully comprehend the depths of the life he was entering. His initiation into the gang came early, marking the beginning of his rise through the brutal ranks of the Mexican Mafia. Loza's early years in the gang were defined by his ruthless pursuit of power and control. He didn't just participate in gang activity, he climbed through the ranks, earning his title as the shot caller for the Cazarez. As a shot caller, Loza was responsible for managing drug trafficking and extortion operations across California. His role in the gang was pivotal, as he oversaw operations that reached far beyond the prison walls. Loza wasn't content with simply overseeing the gang's activities. He was deeply involved in the day-to-day dealings, ensuring that the gang maintained its grip on the streets. Despite his testimony, Loza's life was marked by violence and his role as a feared leader within the Mexican Mafia. His cooperation with authorities did little to erase the fear and respect he had commanded within the gang. Loza's legacy is one of power through violence and control, but it is also a testament to the Mexican Mafia's ability to infiltrate and dominate every corner of California's criminal landscape. His story serves as a stark reminder of the brutality that defines the Mexican Mafia. A gang willing to eliminate anyone who stands in its way and to destroy anyone who threatens its operations. Though Loza's time as a powerful shot caller may have ended, his actions and his testimony will continue to resonate in the world of organized crime, leaving a lasting impact on the Mexican Mafia's ongoing legacy. Our next in the list is Luis Huero Buff Flores, who was born in Hawaiian Gardens, California in 1939, in an area where gangs had already begun to gain a foothold. From an early age, Flores became deeply involved in the Hispanic street gangs that were prominent in Southern California. The environment he grew up in, filled with crime and violence, would set the stage for his future role in one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the United States. As the streets became more dangerous, Flores realized that in order to protect his own, he needed to align himself with other powerful figures. In 1957, at the age of 18, Flores became one of the founding members of the Mexican Mafia, also known as La M. Along with other like-minded individuals, Flores helped form the structure of what would become an empire of crime. The Mexican Mafia was born out of necessity. Originally created as a means to protect Latino inmates in California prisons, it quickly evolved into a force that would control not only prison life, but also illegal operations on the streets. Flores played a central role in that evolution. His leadership, foresight, and ability to unite rival gangs turned La M into a powerful gang of gangs, allowing it to establish dominance in a world where violence and survival were key. Flores' role within the Mexican Mafia wasn't just about survival, it was about power. He played a critical role in uniting rival gangs across California, creating a unified force that could control and manipulate the streets and prisons. His strategic vision for the Mexican Mafia transformed it into an organized and efficient criminal operation. Flores, known for his strength and ability to lead, became a central figure in establishing the gang's hierarchical structure. This was not an easy task, as it required bringing together different factions with a long history of conflict and animosity. But Flores' ability to navigate the volatile world of gang politics allowed him to bring them all under one umbrella, ensuring that La M could enforce its will with unparalleled efficiency. Once the gangs were united, Flores shifted his focus toward building and expanding the Mafia's criminal empire. He oversaw the gang's narcotics trafficking operations, ensuring that drugs flowed through the prison system and into the streets of California. His control over extortion operations allowed the gang to take a share of virtually every illegal activity in the state. From drug dealers to small-time criminals, everyone was forced to pay their dues to La M under Flores' direction. His leadership brought financial stability to the gang, and the Mafia's grip on California tightened. However, Flores wasn't just a figurehead, he was a leader in the truest sense, and his involvement in the day-to-day operations of the Mexican Mafia made him one of the most influential members in its history. His actions were pivotal in ensuring the Mexican Mafia maintained control over its operations, and he set the standard for future members who would rise through the ranks. Under his leadership, La M became a feared entity, not just within the prison system, but also in every neighborhood where gangs fought for dominance. Flores' legacy is undeniable. His efforts to unite various factions within the Latino community in California shaped the course of organized crime in the state. His ability to create a highly organized, profitable criminal network left a lasting impression on both the Mexican Mafia and the criminal world at large. Even after his death, his influence continued to resonate. Future generations of gang members looked to his leadership as a model for success. His blueprint for the Mexican Mafia's structure, its control over illegal enterprises, and its dominance in the California prison system remains a significant part of the gang's history. Luis Cuervo Flores was not only a founding member of the Mexican Mafia, he was the architect of its rise. His leadership, vision, and ability to unite gangs made him a critical figure in the evolution of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the United States. His actions continue to influence the gang's operations to this day, and his legacy remains embedded in the Mexican Mafia's DNA. Number 1 on the list is Rodolfo Cadena. He was born on April 15, 1943, in San Antonio, Texas. Rodolfo Cadena came from a family of second-generation Mexican immigrants. From an early age, he was drawn into the world of street gangs, becoming involved with the Barrio Valle gang. Growing up in the rough neighborhoods of San Antonio, it wasn't long before he found himself deep within a criminal lifestyle. This wasn't just about surviving the streets, it was about becoming someone who commanded respect. As a young man, Cadena was determined to rise above the challenges of his environment. His connections to the streets of Texas were strong, but his ambition was stronger. Cadena was deeply involved in narcotics trafficking and other illegal activities, helping to set the foundation for the gang's future success. His leadership helped solidify La M's role as the dominant gang within California's prisons. But Cadena didn't stop there. He had a vision that extended beyond the prison walls. He sought to unite the Mexican Mafia with other rival gangs, most notably Nuestra Familia, a rival Latino gang that had its roots in California's prison system. However, Cadena's attempt to bring about peace between the two organizations was not without consequences. His efforts to form an alliance between La M and Nuestra Familia were met with resistance and mistrust from both sides. What began as an effort to strengthen the gang's influence led to a violent confrontation that would become a defining moment in the gang's internal politics. The fight between La M and Nuestra Familia sparked a bloody rivalry that still exists in the prison system today. The violence that followed Cadena's failed peace efforts left countless bodies in its wake and solidified the Mexican Mafia's position as one of the most dangerous and powerful criminal organizations in California. However, Cadena's leadership didn't last long. On December 17, 1972, while incarcerated at Chino Reception Center, Cadena was violently attacked and killed by Nuestra Familia members. He was stabbed repeatedly, and despite receiving multiple death threats, he refused to seek protective custody. Instead, Cadena chose to face his fate head-on, a decision that ultimately led to his death. His passing marked a turning point for the Mexican Mafia, as it signaled the end of an era and the beginning of an intense power struggle that would define the gang's future. Rodolfo Cadena's violent death in 1972 set a dangerous precedent for the future of La M. His passing demonstrated the brutal nature of prison gang politics and how power within the Mexican Mafia was earned through bloodshed. While Cadena's life was short, his leadership helped guide the Mafia to its peak, and his death made it clear that the gang's politics were never simple. His legacy is one of ruthless ambition, violent power struggles, and the understanding that within the world of La M, there were no second chances. He may have died young, but his impact on the Mexican Mafia was profound, and his name lives on as a symbol of the gang's early and violent dominance. His death was a powerful reminder of the deadly stakes of the Mafia's inner workings and how the struggle for control was always destined to claim more lives. The world of California's prison system has always been defined by violence, loyalty, and power struggles. For decades, the battle for control within the prisons wasn't just about who had the toughest inmates, it was about who controlled the streets, the drugs, and the very rules by which everyone had to live. In this brutal environment, the Mexican Mafia, or La M, rose to power, quickly establishing itself as a dominant force. However, their rise came at a cost that would ultimately ignite fierce rivalries within the prison walls and beyond. One of the most intense and violent rivalries in the history of California's prisons was the one between La M and a rival gang, Nuestra Familia. What began as a power struggle between two groups of Latino inmates over control of prison territories soon escalated into a bloody war that would consume both sides. Nuestra Familia, originally formed to protect the rights of Latino inmates against white and black gangs, had their own stronghold in the prison system, but as La M grew more powerful, tensions between the two gangs increased. The conflict between them wasn't just about turf, it was about control of the illicit drug trade, extortion, and maintaining a stranglehold over California's prison system. This rivalry reached a tragic and brutal turning point with the death of Rodolfo Cadena, one of the founding members of the Mexican Mafia. Cadena, whose leadership had helped solidify the gang's power, attempted to broker peace between La M and Nuestra Familia, but his efforts were met with distrust and violent resistance from Nuestra Familia members. In 1972, while incarcerated at the Chino Reception Center, Cadena was brutally stabbed to death by members of Nuestra Familia. His death was a stark symbol of the viciousness of the rivalry and how violent the battle for power within the prison system could be. The fact that Cadena, a founding figure of the Mexican Mafia, was killed by members of a rival gang showed that no one was safe. Even the most powerful members of La M weren't immune to the violence that ran rampant within the system. Cadena's death marked a pivotal moment in the history of the Mexican Mafia. It exposed just how deep the fractures between La M and Nuestra Familia ran. What followed was a brutal power struggle that would define the direction of the Mexican Mafia for years to come. With Cadena's death, the Mexican Mafia experienced a shift in leadership, and the gang's internal politics became even more cutthroat. La M would continue to expand its reach, but the rivalry with Nuestra Familia would lead to constant infighting, betrayals, and an ongoing war that would stretch well beyond the prison system and into the streets of. The death of Rodolfo Cadena and the ongoing war with Nuestra Familia highlighted the deep-rooted issues in California's prisons, issues of control, violence, and the struggle for dominance. These were not just isolated incidents. They were part of a larger picture that spoke to the systemic and endemic violence within the state's correctional facilities. The Mexican Mafia's power didn't just stay within the confines of the prison walls. It stretched into the streets, affecting countless lives and creating a legacy of fear and criminal activity that would last for generations. This war, and the brutal acts of violence that defined it, was not just a prison issue. It became a part of the larger criminal culture in California. As the violence continued, it drew in law enforcement, politicians, and communities all over the state. The Mexican Mafia's rise and the ongoing rivalry with Nuestra Familia illustrated how deeply entrenched gang violence had become in the state's criminal landscape. And it wasn't just the violence that worried people, it was the extent to which these gangs had permeated nearly every aspect of California society, from the streets to the prisons, from the drug trade to the violence that followed them. The public and media response to the growing power of these gangs was a wake-up call for many, forcing them to confront the reality of gang violence in California. But even as the Mexican Mafia faced scrutiny, it continued to grow in strength. The rivalries, the wars, and the bloodshed would continue to define the gang for years, with new leadership emerging to take control after Cadena's death and the ongoing battle for supremacy. The violent world of the Mexican Mafia wasn't going to remain unchecked forever. As the gang's influence expanded across the prison system and out into California's streets, law enforcement began to take notice. What had once been a network of loosely connected criminals quickly became a much larger, more organized entity, one that was far harder to ignore. The violence that defined the Mexican Mafia's rise was no longer contained within prison walls. It spread into neighborhoods, affecting families, businesses, and entire communities. Soon, the authorities found themselves up against a complex criminal organization with deep roots and far-reaching connections. With the Mexican Mafia's control over drugs, extortion, and even murder for hire, the investigations into its operations were inevitable. Law enforcement had long known about the gang's activities, but it was the rising body count and the increasing control the Mafia had over California's illegal activities that finally pushed them into action. The arrests came slowly at first, with law enforcement struggling to infiltrate the gang's well-guarded operations. Many members of the Mexican Mafia adhered to the Code of Silence, which made gathering evidence and securing convictions difficult. But the legal system was relentless. The cracks began to show, and once the authorities gained enough information, they moved swiftly. Trials against Mexican Mafia members became high-profile events, drawing public attention as people began to realize just how deeply these gangs had taken hold in California. One of the major challenges faced by law enforcement was that the gang's operations were often run from within the prison system. Members used their positions to communicate with those on the outside, making it hard for authorities to break the Mafia's hold. The courtroom battles were long and grueling, with gang members often trying to use every tool at their disposal to delay or avoid justice. Yet, despite their efforts, law enforcement was determined to see them held accountable. Culturally, the Mexican Mafia's impact has been undeniable. The gang has shaped the way California's street gangs operate, setting the standards for violence, loyalty, and respect. Many gangs across the state, particularly in Southern California, model their operations after La M.A. and emulate their structure. The Mafia's hierarchy, its code of silence, and its methods of control have become the blueprint for a new generation of criminals. In some neighborhoods, the Mexican Mafia is not just feared, it's revered. Its influence is deeply woven into the culture of the streets, where respect and power are valued above all else. For many involved in this world, the gang represents not just criminal enterprise, but a sense of belonging, a bond that ties them to something larger than themselves. The cultural legacy is also evident in the symbolism associated with the Mexican Mafia. Tattoos, graffiti, and hand signs have become ways of marking territory and asserting dominance. These symbols are instantly recognizable, often carrying deep meanings tied to loyalty, status, and power. They serve as constant reminders of the Mexican Mafia's presence and influence, both in the streets and within the prison system. While the Mexican Mafia's dominance in California may have been challenged over the years, it remains a key player in the state's criminal landscape. It continues to influence gangs, shape criminal operations, and affect the lives of countless individuals. The impact of La M.A. is still deeply ingrained in the culture of California's prisons, streets, and even its courtrooms. The gang's violent history, combined with its enduring legacy, serves as a reminder of just how powerful an organized criminal syndicate can become when it has time to root itself in a community. As we look back at the lives and actions of these 6 men, it becomes clear just how dangerous their influence has been. Each one played a pivotal role in shaping the Mexican Mafia and its power, leading behind a trail of destruction, fear, and control. But in the end, who stands out as the most dangerous? Who made the greatest impact, whether through sheer violence, strategic cunning, or the control they wielded over others? Is it Rodolfo Cadena, whose leadership helped guide the gang to its peak before his untimely death? Or perhaps Luis Flores, the man who helped unite rival gangs and created the structure that would dominate California for decades? Maybe it's José Loza, whose brutal enforcement tactics set him apart, or Manuel Valencia, who left behind a legacy of extortion and ruthless punishment. Could it be Leonardo Antolin, whose involvement in violent crimes left an indelible mark on the gang? Or maybe Madrigal Cazarez, whose international operations and military-grade violence pushed the Mexican Mafia to new heights? The power of the Mexican Mafia is undeniable, but who do you think was the most dangerous of these men? Was it their influence, their ability to control others, or the violence that defined their reign? Comment below and let us know what you think. Share your thoughts on who truly had the most significant impact on the Mexican Mafia's rise and legacy. And don't forget to let us know how you feel about the lasting power of an organization like this. Thank you for watching. Until next time.